know we're on the brink of war, Elizabeth. Okay. A great war.
If the Great War was so great, how come there was never a Great War II? The Great War has returned, or rather, it potentially never ended. In this video, we're going to discuss all of the evidence in Black Ops 6 so far that suggests we are about to see the return of the Great War, which could be the pivotal conflict driving Call of Duty Black Ops 7 COD 2025 Zombies when it releases later this year, whatever it officially ends up being called, and could be the very reason the original characters are returning. All of that and more will be unveiled in this video, so stay tuned.
Now we must go, quickly. There is a war to be fought.
War? What kind of war?
A war unlike any you have ever seen. The Great.
We're going to fight the war, Eddie. The Great War. Then, we're going back to the house to kill him and burn it all to the ground. Agartha. The ether, the infinite, everything.
We fought the Great War over and over, but victory could never be ours. We were always doomed to fail. Monty told us the truth. Our journey is the very reason this madness exists. We are the ones who fractured the universe.
Obviously, since the end of the Ether storyline nearly 6 years ago in 2019, we've had many new players begin following the storyline who may not be familiar with the idea of the Great War and the crucial role it played in the Ether storyline. So for their benefit, and for anyone who may need a refresher, let's briefly go over what the Great War is before we discuss its potential return. As we are dealing with a story that's all about strange timelines and odd causality, it might be more useful if we started at the end. In Tag to Toten, the finale map of the Ether storyline, Nikolai explains to the rest of the cast that the true Great War is the one that they fight against themselves.
The Chronorium shows only Samantha's path to redemption. When war is over, she will be normal child again. Innocent. Same as boy.
You have spoken many times of a war, Nikolai. A great war.
Yeah, a war unlike any we have ever seen.
Oh, are you going to tell them everything, Nikolai? The Apothecons, the Keepers, the Shadow Man, the Dark Ether, Monty.
Shadow Man? The Apothe what's? What's he talking about, Nikolai?
They are legends contained in the book, the Chronorium. Tales of demons and angels commanded by the forces of light and darkness.
That does not sound unlike any war we have ever faced.
Demons and angels, light and darkness, the big stuff. Who was who? Which was which? Do you know that, Nikolai?
Monty and Shadow Man were more similar than you know, Richtofen. Both were corrupted by the Dark Ether. One by his own ambition, the other desperately trying to save his friend. Do you remember when I asked you what you really want?
We remember. But why do you ask this now?
Because the Great War? No. The greatest war is the one we fight against ourselves.
To some, this line was seen as a bit of a cop-out, as despite all of the teasers of a map related to the Great War that I just played and will explain and explore shortly, we never got it as a map. But this statement is a deliberate narrative choice and tells us a lot about what the Great War actually is, which will be useful as we step back through the history of the Ether timeline. You see, the entire Ether storyline is a cycle, and the ultimate objective of the characters is to break it, much like surviving the realms. This is rather difficult, however, as their very existence, their souls, have become enmeshed, intrinsically tied to the ether itself. Their life and their journey effectively perpetuates the ether and the cycle they are trapped in. One of the most important events in this cycle is the aforementioned Great War. This is a battle that began in 1292 AD between the Apothicons and humanity, aided by the Keepers, that lasted for 8 years. But there's slightly more to it than that. The Apothicons were once the same species as the Keepers, beings born in the ether and seemingly the first beings in their universe. They created the dimension called Agatha to live in, and began experimenting with life throughout the universe. However, some of these Keepers began experimenting with the Dark Ether, corrupting them, eventually creating the Ether Pyramid device. And, ultimately, because of this, a rift formed between them and their Keeper brethren. The Keepers won, and this new corrupted faction of Apothicons were banished to the Dark Ether, but not before sending Element 115 to all of the universes of the Ether. Eventually, humanity finds the 115 on Earth, which frees the Apothicons. This, however, is where things get a bit confusing. The original battle between the two factions of Keepers is also sometimes thought of as the Great War. Moreover, the fight Primis undertake against the Apothicons in the map, Revelations, at the end of the cycle, can also be thought of as the Great War, as the Apothicons, when being freed in Agatha in the map's opening cutscene, spread 115 through the dimensions once again. We effectively have a repeat of the war for Agatha. All of these events are all the Great War, because as we said, this is a story all about time and causality. As Nikolai said, the real Great War in the Ether storyline is truly the characters fighting against themselves, because in a sense, the entire cycle is just a series of battles in the Great War. If you were to note down a point at which one cycle ends and another begins, it would surely be Primis' arrival at the medieval Great War in 1292, as this is the point at which they arrive after being sent through time. In fact, the Zombies timeline shows us this directly. If we were to have received a quote-unquote Great War map in the Ether storyline, though it may well have appeared medieval, it would have likely contained many modern and alien elements too, as the Great War was not really a single moment in time, but all of time converging at a single moment. After all, the Apothicons sought to corrupt and swallow as many universes as they could. The Great War happened across all of them in many different points in time, and over again the Keepers would join humanity in their battle to once again trap them back below creation into the Dark Ether. This happened for millennia, and this iconic battle across time and space came to be a core part of what fans expected to be a climax for the Ether storyline, starting back in Origins and leading all the way to the conclusion of the story in Tag to Toten all those years later.
It began long ago, on the battlefields of the Great War. My name is Samantha. I'm going to tell you how all this really began.
While in the classic Ether story, the climatic face-off never fully blossomed into a map, in fact one of the themes of Tag to Toten and the old ending is why going to this battle was bad, and guaranteed a loss despite how brave it felt. In this new Dark Ether story, I believe we are currently seeing the seeds be sown to soon return to the Great War once again. And this time, we will fight, and I believe we will win. The Great War has been a rumoured cancelled map for Black Ops 4 Zombies. However, there's never really been much credence to this beyond some medieval Primis textures being found in the files. But it was heavily teased in that game, and regardless of whether this was a bait and switch by Treyarch and wanting to end on a calmer human connection note, one thing is clear. The Great War map was heavily anticipated, and people still to this day pray and wish that we got that Great War map. Treyarch have seen how much the community has talked about the Great War and how much we want to map to that grandiose and scale. And surely if they are planning on bringing back the original characters, now would be the perfect time to follow up on this long abandoned thread that was even referenced by Sam in Cold War's Intel to Grey. A big fear a lot of the community has with Treyarch bringing back the original characters from the dead is that they feel it may undo the point of their sacrifice on Tag de Toten, where they had to be wiped from ever having existed itself, as the ether got purged into none other than the Dark Ether. So if they are going to bring them back, A, they need to do it in a way that makes sense and doesn't undo their sacrifice, and B, there needs to be a proper purpose in them returning and a proper setup of storyline. It doesn't need to just feel like jingling the keys in our faces of nostalgia, similar to when they returned in Call of Duty Mobile, with their character writing feeling a lot more corporate. In bringing them back, Treyarch may be able to give them a grand epic conclusion that they didn't get to receive the first time in Black Ops 4 due to development issues of that game, and the Great War would be the perfect way to do so, thus making, if the original characters are returning, actually have a satisfying conclusion for the community that we didn't receive before. Treyarch, I would imagine, still feel bad that they had to rush out the ending of the Chaos as well as the Ether storyline, and they are already trying to root back in the Chaos story into the Dark Ether narrative, meaning they don't want to just throw that to the waste. Maybe they feel similarly about the ending of the Ether storyline. Whilst narratively wise I really like the emotion that the ending has and what it means metaphorically, it's no secret that the story went out with a whimper, when it should have gone out with a bang. Treyarch may want to light the match and have another explosion once again. The first inklings of a new Great War stem from a large ancient battle talked about in the lore of the Tomb's history, and the Bastard Sons from Citadel Daymore may have played an important role in it. The Bastard Sons of the Owl were likely a key part of this ongoing battle. They were Crusader-era heroes, just as Great War Primis were, medieval Templar knights, and their connection to the greater conflict of the Dark Ether is undeniable. Historical evidence points to the Bastard Sons of the Owl as warriors who, much like Primis, fought against supernatural forces beyond human comprehension. Notably, the original Primis statues, referred to as the Statues of the Ancients, in Origins depicted them wielding swords rather than the staves we later associate them with. This is a crucial detail, as the Citadel Daymore statues of the Bastard Sons also showcase warriors with swords in the exact same pose, in a similar place by a dig site in France. The parallel is striking. We also see a statue involved in the free ray gun Easter egg on the tomb be referred to as an ancient. Could this mean that the Bastard Sons are another incarnation of the legendary warriors, the same essence manifesting across time to fight the Great War whenever or wherever it emerges? One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the Great War's return is the legendary status of the Ice Staff in the Black Ops 6 universe. Archibald, a key character in the tomb, already knows of its existence, implying that it has historical significance.
No, couldn't be. Yes, it blasted well is. This chap's is the fabled Staff of Ice. Well, the sticky bit at any rate. Be a good egg, Potts. Stash it somewhere safe, there's a good fellow. Doth mine eyes deceive? Is that the other piece of the Staff of Ice? By Jove, it is! Potts, you know what this means? It means that unless you remember to pack some jolly old acetylene, we might be bloody well stuffed. Dog my cats, it's more of those bitey blighters. Stand fast, lads! Here they come! What the? They're after the Staff of Ice! To arms! To arms! Extinguish the flames, froze the crystals.
The only recorded historical conflict where the Ice Staff would have been known is the Great War, which strongly suggests that a version of this war took place in this timeline. Furthermore, Origin's mound was the centerpiece of the Great War, and a degenerated version of the mound now exists in the Dark Ether Nexus. Given that a location within the Dark Ether is required to upgrade the Ice Staff, could this mean that the Great War in this new universe was trans-dimensional? Did it take place both in our world and in the Dark Ether simultaneously. In the Aether's Great War, the Apothicons were forced back inside the Dark Aether, and that was considered the end. Could this one have been fought inside as well, and potentially thus quite a lot longer? Although I would imagine with the Apothicons opening up rifts across universes in the Aether story, that humans surely would have also been able to transcend those gateways, but it's never been explicitly stated. And even these pillars that can be seen in the background of the mound that Group 935 similarly recreated for the Pack-a-Punch mound even seem to be more similar with where the Odin Sentinel artifact's home is, almost looking exactly the same. I will be having a future video coming up about the Sentinel artifacts and the new lore from this map, and its origins, and why the Odin artifact is even here, but it does have me wondering if the Sentinel artifacts may have even been from the prior Aetherverse and could have been important in the original Great War, because why is it here literally on the battlegrounds of the Great War? It is very peculiar indeed. One of the most intriguing elements of the tomb is the sheer range of historical artifacts and structures found within it. As players explore, they uncover layers of history dating back to ancient civilizations, including Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences. For example, the Call of Duty blog describes statues of ancient warriors line the tombs in alcoves. Along the walls, along with depictions of shielded hoplites, engaged a charging bull. And hoplites were citizen soldiers of ancient Greek city-states who were primarily armed with spears and shields. Could there have been a version of these original characters summoned through the essence in ancient Greece, as they could have also been summoned as the Templar Knights in the Bastard Sons? The deepest layers contain structures so old that they seem to predate recorded history, while the upper layers include statues and carvings from the Roman era. This suggests that the tomb has been a site of immense significance throughout multiple generations and cultures of human civilization. But why? The presence of different architectural styles and artifacts points to one possible conclusion. The Great War did not happen just once, instead it has broken through into the real world at multiple points in time, forcing humanity to rise up against the forces of the Dark Aether again and again. As well as humans were constantly lured to this location of the Dark Aether Nexus with the allure of finding the Sentinel artifact. This is further supported by the fact that each of these historical periods shows signs of conflict, ruins, battle damage, and depictions of violent struggles against unknown enemies. If this theory holds true, then what we have long assumed to be a singular Great War may actually be a cycle, one where the Dark Aether periodically breaches our world, triggering a battle that threatens the balance of existence. Each time, a new set of warriors steps up to fight back the tide of darkness, potentially explaining why so many cultures have myths of legendary battles between light and dark forces. The cyclical nature of the Great War has profound implications for the original characters. We have long believed that the Bastard Sons of the Owl were potentially an early incarnation of Primis. But what if they were just one of many groups chosen throughout history? Leaked documents from Black Ops 2's development indicated that the Ancients were intended to be ancestors of Primis, suggesting a recurring cycle of warriors inheriting the same heroic essence, essentially being reborn through their children. And theoretically, it could be true that when Primis gets sent back to the Great War, they have children, and their children's children, etc. become them themselves, reincarnated in Origins, or in many other timelines. Different events of course would play out, and the timelines would be off as well. Now, with COD 2025's rumoured storyline focusing on the essence of the original characters, this theory becomes even stronger. It may not be that the Bastard Sons were unique, they may have been just the latest incarnations of an eternal protective force of the universe, our original crew. Each time the Great War emerged in history, the essence of the original characters likely chose for new vessels, warriors from different cultures and eras, to fight back the Dark Aether's influence, since they are not currently meant to exist. This would mean that the Bastard Sons were simply one of these groups, not the only one, especially when the tomb is a thematic successor to Origins, of which its map was supposed to be called the Tomb, but in French, La Tombe. It could very well be that they have looked back on cut concepts from Origins and they're trying to reincorporate them now. Warriors from different cultures and eras to fight back the Dark Aether's influence, since they are not currently meant to exist. This would mean that the Bastard Sons were simply one of these groups, not the only one. Every generation that faced the Great War would have had its own versions of these characters, embodying their essence to stand against the apocalyptic threat. If their essence has been the driving force behind humanity's defenders throughout history, then their return in COD 2025 would not just be fan service, it would be a fundamental part of the story. This aligns perfectly with what we know about COD 2025's villain, a hat-wearing individual who seems to be one of the Shadow Smiths. Described by Tom Henderson, who leaked this as being a warden, this Shadow Smith reportedly seeks to harness the essence of the original characters to bring back the multiverse. But who are the Shadow Smiths? And does this set them up as the potential antagonist force of a new Great War? We don't get much in the way of a description on them. In fact, we only know the name the Shadow Smiths because of a single throwaway line from the entity that is easily missed. It warns Ava that, without its protection, darker and more powerful entities will begin to sense her, and that the Shadow Smiths will take her.
Little sister, he is searching for you. The Shadow Smiths will take you.
Then, she is indeed taken not long after in Liberty Falls, so we can naturally assume the entity that took her is a Shadow Smith. The one we see appear very briefly at the end of Modern Warfare Zombies does seem to resemble the Shadow Man from Black Ops 3 as well, with a relatively regal and static stance, floating just as the Shadow Man did, and a large hat on his head. However, with only a black silhouette floating on the roof of the mansion to make out, it becomes difficult to pass much more detail from this short glimpse. His uncanny resemblance to the Shadow Man does deserve deeper discussion, however, and we shall do that in the future. We know that the old Great War existed to keep the Apothicons locked away in the Dark Ether and protect the multiverse from their corruption. Could it be that these Shadow Smiths share similar goals? Or even, could the first one, long before they split into Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man, have even been a Shadow Smith? Or the original Shadow Smith? As insane as it may sound at first to grapple, remember that in leaks for COD 2025 Zombies, we already learned that the villain is some sort of evil force in the Dark Ether who wanted to gather the essence of the original characters. And why was that again? To restore the entire multiverse. This feat of creation, making an entire and near infinite multiverse using only that essence, is a feat that seems to be equal in power to that of the first one originally creating the multiverse. Could it be that a Shadowsmith long ago created a multiverse of worlds inside the Dark Ether, only to be banished there? And that was the creation of the old Ether multiverse. Whilst yes, the Keepers were the ones who did so, could the storyline now be reinterpreted in this way? And the original Keepers could have been Shadowsmiths. These Shadowsmiths are going to be called Wardens, as in probably protectors or guardians of the Dark Ether. Could this be synonymous with the Keepers, who too were trying to protect the universe and bend it to their will? Both may share the philosophy that only they know how the universe should be ran, and so want to police it like a warden, or even a sheriff given the cowboy hat, or guard it like a keeper. We know that the Shadowsmiths are likely old ones, ancient Dark Ether beings, for them to have so much power, meaning that they must have probably been in the realm for eons. Potentially they could even be the remnants of Monty and the Shadow Man being thrown into the Dark Ether and fracturing and corrupting over eons, and they may have created this new being or faction, the Shadowsmiths. This would mean that, in theory, the villain in COD 2025 winning would potentially mean the restarting of the cycle and undoing all of the progress made so far. It could even have already happened, and we are still technically within the cycle, not having yet permanently shed the shackles of the prior universes. I have made a prior video that I believe the cycle is returning, as so many events are playing out similarly, such as the fact that we are literally back where the Origins Pack-a-Punch Mound was, where the Great War took place. We are back in France, and there are so many other thematic similarities to the old Ether story. Could the cycle not have truly been broken, and we are truly still stuck within it, with everything flooding back once again? With all this relation to the Shadowsmiths and the Apothicons, it seems likely they may indeed have been who attacked the world during the ancient times of the Great War. And if the entity being around prevented them from reaching into the world, perhaps Cortifex's rule of the Dark Ether and other various Archons being in control afterwards have simply kept them at bay. And now that no one rules the Dark Ether after Zykov and the entity, these periods of chaos open the gates for the Great War to resume once again. And to truly win, they need to take the essence of the original characters kingdoms, their echo, their souls, and use it to restore the old Ether multiverse and truly take it over. That could very well be who the original characters are. Not restored properly, but they are merely echoes, remnants of their past. For as the tomb's ending states, nothing is truly gone if the memory remains. And we've seen echoes throughout the Dark Ether, such as Archibald in the Amulet, or even fighting the entity after we defeat it at the ending of Modern Warfare Zombies. I wonder if the Dark Ether may just be manifesting echoes of the original characters and we don't play as them themselves, and they are summoned to protect the realm. To fully understand the historical connections to the Great War, we must examine the timeline of the Crusades and how it aligns with the classic Ether story. The Crusades took place between the late 11th century and the late 13th century, from 1095 to 1291. These wars were fought to establish the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the Middle East, with Crusaders being Catholic militants sanctioned by the Pope. The Knights Templar, a powerful and mysterious order, were founded in 1119 AD to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Over time, the Templars accumulated immense wealth and influence, spreading their presence across Europe and becoming an international military force, with no single national allegiance. By 1291, the Crusader kingdoms began to fall. Grandmaster Jacques de Molay attempted to rally support for continued military action, even negotiating with Genghis Khan's grandson for assistance. However, by this point, the Templars had been pushed out of the Holy Land and had established their base on the island of Cyprus. In 1292, the Ether timeline marks the beginning of the Great War between humanity and the Apothegons, at least in the timeline we saw in Revelations. Of course, probably happened at many different points throughout history in other universes. Just 2 years later, in 1294, Primis intervenes to save Pablo. Then, on New Year's Eve, 1299, Primis and the Keepers successfully bring the Great War to a close. By 1300, Primis instructs the Wolf King to build his castle and then disappears from history, not knowing if they just died or what exactly happened to them. Around this same period, the Owl, a pivotal figure in the Dark Ether storyline, was gathering knowledge and power. Between 1292 and 1314, he is believed to have studied the dark arts, becoming a leading occult figure. The Owl played a key role in the downfall of the Templars. In 1314, Jacques de Molay was accused of heresy and devil worship. The Owl himself provided evidence against him, solidifying de Molay's fate. As de Molay was burned at the stake in Paris, the Owl and his 4 bastard sons fled south to Avalon, carrying numerous artifacts, possibly including the Necronomicon and the Obscurus Attilium. His journey may have taken him through Constantinople, where he could have encountered relics tied to Zeus, such as the Horseshoe of Pegasus, or to Egypt, where he may have acquired Ra's Ankh, both of which prior were central to some of the Chaos maps 9 and Ancient Evil. We would then go on to collect them during the Citadel Daymore Easter egg, which took place in the Castle of the Owl. These relics tie directly into the legends of the Sentinel artifacts, reinforcing the idea that the Owl had knowledge of, and had access to, immensely powerful items linked to the greater cosmic struggle. Despite his vast knowledge, the Owl seemingly never reached the tomb to claim the Sentinel artifact. His sons, however, carried on his legacy, either resisting his manipulation or falling victim to it entirely. His absence in his sons' lives and the timing of his reign do suggest it's actually very possible that the Owl was the man who eventually started the Societe cult, perhaps even learning of the Order. This timeline raises an intriguing possibility. Could the Owl and his followers have been aware of, or even involved in, the Great War? The timing is too precise to be a coincidence, and if the Great War is returning in COD 2025, or perhaps never left and has been ongoing, the Owl's influence may once again shape the conflict. It's important to note, we learned in Vanguard that before Cortefex's rule, the Dark Ether was in a near constant state of violent upheaval. Various powerful entities waged endless wars in an attempt to seize control, each faction vying for dominance in a world where only conflict seemed to define existence. The Construct, a mysterious force, would eventually choose an Archon to rule, and in this instance, it selected Cortefex. With the power of the Construct, Cortefex launched the Nether Wars, a brutal campaign that saw him eliminate his rivals and solidify him as the ruler of the Dark Ether. However, the Construct ultimately abandoned him, leading to his downfall at the hands of Kraft and the Vanguard crew. Upon Cortefex's death, Zykov likely consumed his essence, and along with that and a lot of the other old ones he consumed, led him to be powerful enough to probably become the new Archon, wielding immense power, until he was, in turn, defeated and used to empower the Sam AI. This establishes a key theme. During all of our encounters with the Dark Ether in game, there has always been a reigning figure in power. But what happens when there isn't? If history has shown us anything, it's that without a ruler, the Dark Ether spirals into chaos. This period of unrestrained war, with no single entity controlling the dimension, may very well be the basis for the Great War in COD 2025. With the construct's absence and no Archon terrain, the Dark Ether is primed for the most devastating conflict yet. A war that could spill over into our reality once more. Further evidence of this is that the blog specifically states that multiple warring factions fought amongst each other, meaning that they had different ideologies and were part of different groups. It wasn't as simple as the Great War we knew between the Keepers, humans, and the Apothegons. This was between many factions, and I would assume many different cultures in humanity worshipped different Old Ones and Dark Ether gods, potentially even the very ones we saw in Vanguard Zombies and more that we have never gotten privy to. Because, for example, in the new Crazy Place, these pillars are described as being runes to worship old ancient gods forgotten long ago. This would suggest that there were many gods in the Dark Ether that were probably trying to manipulate humanity to their side and battle with them. And this war could have spilled across the Earth and the Dark Ether, with some factions potentially wanting to take over the world, some not. Not all of them may have been just for blood and chaos and pure domination. They all had different ideals, just as humans do. But in order for this disorder, mayhem and turmoil to return, all it would require is the toppling of the current Archon, the Sam AI, with Zykov potentially serving as a battery powering her powers inside her, which I've discussed in prior videos. And this is clearly being set up for either the mansion or Janus Towers when she turns. Even official Call of Duty blog posts suggest a large-scale conflict brewing beneath the surface. Consider this excerpt from a description of the tomb. Ancient priests charged with interpreting the sacred mysteries, the Hierophants seem to have uncovered more than they were bargaining for. The candle lit, vaulted ceiling marks the resting place of important figures. A frieze sculpted into the wall showing a fierce battle between opposing forces. Arrow trap installations line the stairway down into the shrine, flanked by skulls on chain pulleys. There is so much death here, so many skulls, so many skeletons, so many that probably succumbed and failed to get the central artifact, as well as were victims to the battling and warring that laid throughout. This passage is laced with allusions to a battle of grand proportions, mass death, as the Dark Ether is described on this map as having bled into the world for centuries. This weakened veil may be one that may literally be the Great War, or at least a time it managed to break into our world. The very presence of these battle depictions suggests an awareness of an ongoing or cyclical conflict, one that has been fought in various forms throughout history. Everything we've discussed so far points to one major conclusion. The Great War did happen again, was never fully won, and is about to continue once more. This means the original characters must return for COD 2025. If Trek is finally delivering the Great War in a playable format, there is no way that they could do it without Richtofen, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo. They are the figures most closely associated with this conflict, and to probably tell the story, they must be involved. This lines up perfectly with the leaks from earlier in the year discussing the return of these original characters in COD 2025, something that made very little sense story-wise to us at the time. Now though, we can begin to understand exactly what's happening. But this time the Great War could be very different. Instead of just the Apothegons, the Keepers, humans, and Primis, we can instead see the original characters fighting against the Shadowsmiths, and maybe there are potentially many different factions in the Dark Ether warring amongst each other, much like we saw with Cortifex and the Nether Wars. And with the very Ice Staff returning on the tomb, with it now having Dark Ether markings written on it, it suggests that at least one Dark Ether god may have been involved with it, and potentially that could be linked to the Odin Sentinel artifact. Maybe each of the artifacts are linked to different gods, with it being suggested that Cortifex has relation, or potentially even is, Ra, and is the reason why the Egyptians got the Staff of Ra. Could we see in the future all 4 staffs on a future map? Now that CODs are on a unified engine, they can literally just port the Ice Staff over and have 3 others. The Great War could break out this time in Liberty Falls, with that being the central point for where Richtofen has been doing time distortion, and where the Sentinel artifacts will likely be activated by Richtofen and or the Sam AI to get their goal. Richtofen, in wanting to restore his family, may rip a hole into the dark ether, and whilst he may get his victory and his happy life with them, may open Pandora's box and cause the hordes of the realm to seep out once again, and the original characters may be summoned to protect it from within. That is it. That is the culmination of a storyline that has been building for more than a decade. The Great War, the battle that has loomed in the background since Black Ops 2's origins, could finally be coming, and this time we're going to experience it firsthand. Prepare yourselves, the Great War is upon us. Plenty more storyline videos to come. Stay tuned.